bunch of you for checking in on me when I didn't post last week. We had really, really bad storms here in Illinois last weekend, and Sean and I didn't have power for several days, so I couldn't upload because I had no internet, and I couldn't film because I had no power, so my apologies, but I'm back, I'm here, I'm ready to go, even though this week has been very challenging for me. Anyway, I have an unsolved case for you tonight. I feel like I'm super loud, so hopefully you can turn it down, or anyway. And this is one of those cases that I just kind of kept waiting to see if more would come out, and it didn't. So we are going to, as you can see by the title, talk about Christine Diefenbach. Christine was a shy, artistic 9th grader at intermediate school 217 in Queens County. She loved to draw, and she loved horses. She was a huge fan of Wayne Newton and David Hasselhoff, and she would pore over Sunday's newspaper trying to find articles about her idols. So they had that little Parade magazine that was inside the newspaper. Do they still do that? Anyway, that's what she did. So she and her family lived in Richmond Hill, and it was like a working class neighborhood. It was getting kind of worse. So it's a working class neighborhood in New York City, in the borough of Queens County. Christine lived there with her dad, whose name is John, her mom, Margaret, and her 5-year-old sister, Patricia. They lived in a modest row house in the quiet neighborhood on 125th Street, just a few blocks away from Lefferts Boulevard and Jamaica Avenue. Those were the busier streets that were lined with stores. Now, as I was saying, Queens County, New York was once filled with one-family homes that had small green lawns, but by the decade that Christine grew up there, it had changed. Drug violence fueled by the crack epidemic seeped into the once stable middle-class borough, peaking in the 1980s, and it ravaged the neighborhoods that were once considered quiet and safe. According to an article published in the New York Times, murders had increased to 5.8% citywide from 1987 to 1988, of which 293 murders in Queens County alone in 1987, an increase from 234 in 1986. So increasing violence and crime meant that the police were stretched pretty thin, and law-abiding citizens kind of had the misfortune of witnessing drug dealers or murders were scared into silence by the violence that had enveloped their neighborhood. So that brings us to February 7th, 1988. Shortly after 7:30 a.m., Christine put on her jacket and her gloves, and she left home as she did every Sunday morning to walk the 5 blocks to the newsstand on the corner of Lefferts Boulevard. She had 4 quarters in her pocket to purchase the Sunday paper and a gallon of milk. She had told her dad where she was going. He said it was okay, like I said, she did this every week, and he went back to sleep for about an hour. John was quite alarmed when he woke up, and Christine had not returned. He and Margaret were understandably alarmed. So John goes out, and he any word from her, John decides to call the police. But they told him he could not file a missing persons report until she was missing for 24 hours. So, a weird fact that I found, and I'm not exactly sure why, but John and Margaret had a young boy staying at their house that morning. Who it was or why it was, I don't know. But around 12:30, they decide that they're going to take this guy, a little kid, I don't know how old he was, home, so that they can concentrate on searching for Christine. Because obviously the police are not going to help yet. So they load the boy and their 5-year-old daughter Patricia into the family car and quickly drive to the boy's house. After dropping him off on their way home, John spotted something that made his heart stop. 2 police cars and an ambulance gathered near the Long Island Railroad tracks. John immediately feared the worst. These railroad tracks were located near the intersection of 121st Street and 89th Avenue in the Richmond Hills section of Queens, just 4 blocks from the family's home on 125th Street. Now, many locals would use these tracks as a shortcut to get from the residential area to the nearby businesses, but Christine was not one of them. John worked for the Transit Authority, and he told her, do not go near those tracks as a safety precaution. So, John pulls over, and he gets out of the car, and he quickly goes over to speak with one of the police officers. He shows this officer a picture of Christine and explains that she is missing, and he needs help finding her. The officer calmly guided John away from the scene and then tells him that they have found the body of a teenage girl. John said, they told me that they were 90% sure it was my little girl. Because of the grievous wounds to the victim's face and head, officers would not allow John or Margaret to see her. They were advised to go home and wait for the medical examiner. Officials soon confirmed to the Diefenbach family that it was in fact Christine that had been found. She had been the victim of what could only be described as a brutal attack. New York Detective Captain William Rowe noted, it appeared that it was a heavy blow to the skull that had killed her. A passerby had discovered her body. Her shirt had been ripped open, and her pants had been pulled down. One of her shoes was originally missing, but later on found nearby. In her pockets, investigators found a piece of gum and the 4 quarters that she had intended to use to make her purchases that morning. The medical examiner determined that Christine had died from crushing injuries to the skull and extensive lacerations to her brain. Her head and neck were heavily bruised, and she had been hit with a heavy, blunt instrument. And although her clothing had been disheveled, there was no sign that she had been SA'd. They assumed that she had fought with her killer, but she had been wearing gloves at the time of the attack, so fingernail scrapings yielded no DNA evidence. Detectives spent hours searching the area around the railroad tracks for the murder weapon, but they admitted they weren't sure exactly what had been used on Christine. New York Captain William Rose said, there's a lot of stuff that could have been used, but we haven't found anything with blood on it. They thought she might have been hit with a large rock that was then taken away with the perpetrator. 14-year-old Christine's murder stunned everyone that knew her. Like I said, she was a 9th grade student where she was known for her artistic talents. Her teachers had been encouraged that specialized in art, but she wasn't sure if that's what she wanted to do. John told reporters that she liked to sketch. She wanted to own a horse or work in stables. Christine's art teacher, Lee Olson, told reporters that she was extremely talented. Teachers would in fact often get Christine to draw artwork for their classroom bulletin boards whenever there was a contest held to determine who had the best board. Teachers knew that any artwork provided by Christine would give them an edge over the competition. He said she will be missed, not just as an artist, but as a warm person. She was the personification of sweetness, innocence, and goodness. So for the past 2 years, Christine had been going to the newsstand every Sunday to buy newspapers. She would clip those articles to use in various classes at school, but her main motive was to check for coverage on Wayne Newton. She was obsessed with him, and she had even convinced her father to take her to one of his concerts earlier. He was featured in Parade magazine that came inside the Sunday edition of the paper, and she always made sure she got a copy. She never reported any problems on her way to and from the newsstand, so her parents felt like it was safe for her to go alone. Man, I was everywhere when I was 12, all over on my bike. Tragically, Christine's death came just 2 months before her family was planning to move out of Queens. Her parents had recently decided to relocate to Selden, a small hamlet in Long Island, New York. John ruefully noted, "I wanted to get out of the city and make a better life for my kids. I never liked New York City, but this neighborhood was never that bad." Christine was shy, and she wasn't the type to talk to someone she didn't know. Her father told reporters that she had been taught to stay away from strangers, and he didn't think that she would have willingly walked down to those train tracks with someone she wasn't familiar with. He said that he believed she was lured or forced to go into the railroad yard. Detectives at this point are trying to find anyone who had seen Christine after she left home on Sunday morning. Although she had been warned by her father not to take the shortest cut through the railroad yard, they believe that she had in fact been heading that direction when she was attacked. So what they didn't know was whether or not she had been alone at the time, and they were hoping that someone had spotted her while she was walking. Long Island Railroad workers, that's a tongue twister, at the train yard where her body had been found were shocked by this murder, and they wanted to do something to help. The day after she was killed, they started to backyard safer. They fenced off the entire area and blocked access to the shortcut that people had been using. In April of 1988, Christine's school announced they were creating an award in her memory. The Christine and Diefenbach Memorial Award in Art would be presented each year to a 9th grade student who excelled in art. School principal Jules Weiler told reporters that Christine's family had also donated $500 in her name for the school to use as they saw fit. We will create the Christine and Diefenbach Gallery in the auditorium, and it will be the showcase of the finest artwork created by our students. On the first anniversary of Christine's murder, I don't have English today, y'all. Detectives admitted they'd been baffled by this brutal case. Despite investing thousands of dollars into investigating this case, they had no witnesses, no suspects, and no murder weapon. It appeared that Christine had been a victim of a senseless, horrific, random act. Christine's parents and sister had moved away from Queens and were trying to rebuild their lives. John noted, "I asked why this happened, and I will never find an answer." He still didn't know all the details about the attack that killed his daughter. "I don't want to know if she suffered. I don't think I could describe the last minutes of her life." Many detectives working on Christine's case had children of their own, and they desperately wanted to find the person that did this to Christine. Despite all their efforts, however, the investigation stalled and then went cold. As the 3rd anniversary passed, New York detective James Anusata admitted it's a very emotional case. It all hits home. We all see our daughters. Although investigators did not have any suspects, detective told reporters that the killer probably was not a stranger to Christine. "We think she knew this person. She relaxed with this person, otherwise there would have been screams and struggles." John just wanted justice for his daughter. "I don't think that there's a day that goes by that we don't think about it. And I hope that this killer has a conscience. I hope that every time there's a knock on the door, it bothers him, that he realizes it could always be the police." Years go by, and Christine's case remains ice cold. In December of 2018, detectives announced they're taking a fresh look at her case in the hopes of finally solving it. They submitted evidence to be retested for DNA, and they combed back through the case files, searching for something that may have been missed during the initial investigation. Detective John Roberts noted, "We believe a second look could be very fruitful. This was a case that pulled at the heartstrings of the investigators involved and the community, but it unfortunately went cold." Detectives said they had received an anonymous phone call a few months after Christine was killed that implicated a man known as Tennessee in Christine's murder. Tennessee, who was in his 50s in 2018, had been a regular patron at a bar near the crime scene in 1988. He had a history of violence case is that unfortunately I do not think the world will ever see solved. Unfortunately, she had gloves on at the time, and I have to think that the intention was to assault her, unfortunately. And I think that this person, perpetrator, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, I just assume it was a man, got scared away by something before he could completely remove all of her clothing in order to assault her. Thank goodness. But they were smart enough to take the weapon with them, I believe. It was probably a rock or something like that. You don't really see people carrying around blunt instruments very often without people noticing. But I think there's a high possibility that this person may have gone to their grave with all of the details of this case. Not that 1988 was that long ago, 36 years, you know. But I do kind of want to know how they cleared the homeless man. Maybe he was lying. And why would someone call and say that someone confessed to this and not ever call back or give more details and, you know, say exactly what he said? Or I don't know, that I find that kind of weird. So maybe they are still alive and maybe they're willing to come forward, but I looked again last night just to make sure that nothing else had come out about this case, and I couldn't see anything new. I think that times have changed. Our DNA sequencing and, you know, the power to search for things is much stronger now. I think maybe they should look into the waistband area of her jeans, pants, I don't know exactly what they were, because I think maybe they could discover some DNA there, and then maybe look into her gloves, because I cannot imagine that she didn't fight back unless, and I'm not sure exactly where it was, but unless this person hit her from behind and stunned her, I think there's no way that she did not fight back. And it's very possible that that is exactly what happened. I'm not sure exactly where the injuries on her head occurred, but if she was passed out or groggy, there is a chance that maybe she wasn't with it enough to fight back, and that is why there was no type of DNA. This case is incredibly sad to me. Her family was trying to do what was best, moving out of that area, trying to make a better life for their children. She had walked that way every day or every Sunday for 2 years, and you can't even say it was a robbery attempt because whoever it was didn't take her money. Again, I believe that the perpetrator got scared and ran before they completed whatever it is that they were trying to do. So maybe that's why her money wasn't taken, but I have to believe if they were trying to rob her, they would have taken the money before her clothing would get disheveled. As a kid who ran all over the place in the late 1980s and early 1990s without a cell phone or a pager, this very well could have been me. I wasn't in New York, but I didn't live that far from several big cities, so it just makes me incredibly sad when cases like this happen, because I really want their family to have some closure, something, you know. I know John said he didn't want to know about the last several minutes of her life, but I can imagine that he has imagined every scenario possible, and to just know maybe that this person wasn't going to assault her, or that this person has been in jail for a long time or something, might give him a little bit of solace. I didn't find out if John and Margaret are still alive. I didn't find anything, which she was very young, about Patricia being affected by the death of her older sister. But I'm sure that she remembers her older sister. I think it's great that her school did it, and I'm having a really, really hard time with it. And it's one of those scenarios where you just don't know how to feel. And so I feel kind of numb, if that makes sense. Anyway, thank you guys so much for being here today. My patrons, I'll see you later on for another true crime video. I will film that after this. I'll see you guys soon. Thanks again. I appreciate you all here on my channel so much. Thank you for checking on me. Thank you for making sure I'm okay. And thank you for sticking with me through all of the craziness that my life has brought in the past 6-7 years that I've gone through this channel. I'm going to continue to make content for you. I will never bail out without giving you an explanation. I will either make a video that tells you that I'm no longer making content, or I will post something on my community tab, but I will never just disappear because I can't stand it. I'll see you guys soon. Thanks again.